your home for red-pilled interfaith dialogue. Truth Jihad Radio. Kevin Barrett proudly bringing on some of the best Catholic thinkers out there since 2006. If you like this kind of radio, don't hesitate to go to kevinbarrett.substack.com, where you can subscribe and get early access plus free downloads.
Ladies and gentlemen,
welcome back. This is the second hour of Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett, doing this live show every Friday evening, broadcasting live from an old ice cream trailer, rehabbed into a studio, such as it is, parked somewhere in the woods of western Wisconsin at a thoroughly undisclosed location, quite a long ways from Dick Cheney's. I try to bring on the most interesting people who are questioning the fake reality that is getting more and more thick and miasmic and smothering us. Everywhere you turn, the lies are going further and further out of control. What's going on here? Is this just a matter of political propaganda run amok, or is there a spiritual dimension to it? Is Satan the father of lies? Is there a demonic level to the lies? Is there something coming from God in terms of the truth tellers who are pushing back? That's the topic of many of my interventions here on Truth Jihad Radio and in my chutbahs over at the Hydria YouTube channel. And it's also very much related to what Thaddeus Kozinski is writing about in his new essay, Are You Aware? And are you aware of your unawareness? So let's talk about it. Welcome, Thaddeus. How are you?
Hi, Kevin. How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, doing well. Good to have you back. It's a great essay. And, I think I may not agree with you on every last detail, but I think that you're definitely barking up the right tree. I mean, really the right tree overall, as you are teasing out the relationship between people's perception of what's happening in terms of topical events, political events, COVID and inflation and the war and abortion and all this sort of thing, and their spiritual state, and that there's a metaphysical dimension to this, and it's hard to talk about and hard to put a finger on, but I think you made a really good effort in this article, so congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so you said there's a broad spectrum as broad as the distance between heaven and hell, describing the level of awareness of people as to what's truly happening now in the world today and why. And does that mean that us truthers who kind of get that a lot of the COVID official discourse is dubious, that 9/11 was a false flag and a big lie, and that what we're being told about Ukraine is an outrageous big lie, so are we in heaven already, and the people who believe that stuff are in hell? Sometimes it feels almost like the opposite. It feels like, they took the blue pill, and it's all such a pleasant illusion. We took the red pill, and we see this horrific reality. So how does that heaven and hell metaphor really work?
Well, I mean, the state of consciousness can be simultaneously one of a kind of stable peace and deep knowing of reality and God. And it can be accompanied by a great sorrow and frustration and anger and negative emotions don't have to disturb that center. This life is meant to be a trial. We're meant to suffer. The cross is really the path to wisdom. But we have hope. Those who understand reality always know that God transcends the world, and there's no power other than what he allows people to have. E. Michael Jones talks a lot about the cunning of reason. We know God is always bringing great good out of this. But I mean, you could make these statements, but in the end, what we're dealing with right now is just an unspeakable and insufferable amount of evil and lies and suffering. And there's no doubt about it. Now, if you understand that and you look at it squarely in the face, and you also try to fight it, resist it, and love people anyway, love your enemies when you realize who your enemies are and that you have them. It's even more difficult. I mean, everyone's going through the suffering. And as Plato teaches us, that nobody suffers more than the tyrant. The ones who are completely outside of reality, are caught up in their own power and self-will, narcissism and self-worship, because they have no peace. They know that their soul is sick, and there's a deep spiritual torture that they're suffering. But they want something more than reality and truth and God and love. They want their own will and their own power, and that gives them a kind of illusion of satisfaction. But it's obviously, they're not happy. As Plato teaches us in the Republic, only those whose souls are just are happy, and they're willing to suffer, for that kind of wisdom and virtue that they hold on to. So, no, we're not in heaven, but heaven wins, and yet we have to go through this. And the question is, where are we going? What's going to happen? How do we most effectively resist it and try to fight for the good? And that's a difficult. It's the most difficult question right now.
Yeah, and you come down hard on the side of Catholicism as being kind of the answer to all of this, and obviously I don't fully agree with that. However, I think there are, just to take one example, sometimes I think that one of the better ways to deal with the situation we're in, which seems to be kind of pre-apocalyptic, that we're into a kind of an end time scenario that is likely to turn into a huge disaster, would be to take that monastic route. The church did a good job, or at least tried, and made a really heroic effort to try to keep some civilization going and some ilm or knowledge going during the European Dark Ages after the fall of the Roman Empire. So that kind of monasticism, I don't, in Islam, of course, we don't have monasticism in the sense of taking the smartest guys and making sure they don't ever breed. But we do admire, actually, the Quran, it has a very positive verse about Christianity. Christians are going to be the best friends, or are the best friends of Muslims, because they have monks and priests, and they are not arrogant. That is, they're humble, and by implication, genuinely spiritual. And so those monastic efforts to preserve civilization during the so-called Dark Ages are admirable. And if we're heading into more Dark Ages, which is kind of what it looks like, maybe that's where we should be heading. Sheikh Imran Hussein says we should have Muslim villages. He wants Christians in those Muslim villages too. And he wants them to be as far away from the urban areas as possible and self-sufficient in food and water and the necessities of life.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I wish I was more of a survivalist and had those skills. I do. I mean, I worked at a kind of small Catholic educational institution, which brought together homeschooling families and people of like-mindedness and who are conservative in their morality, and had a kind of skepticism about modernity. And I could see the good in that. But I don't know. I think everyone has to just make those prudential decisions where they are and what their resources are. I mean, there's some sort of non-negotiables that we need to preserve our souls and our bodies. First off, it's the spiritual and your soul, and for that you definitely need support. You have to have friends, you have to have community, you have to have a kind of bulwark there, or else you'll go crazy. No one can be isolated and alone and survive this. I mean, there are people who become hermits and go out, and but most of us have families. We have children, which I have three teenagers in college right now, so I can't afford to go somewhere. I have to keep a job and pay for that. And but I think the most important thing is the truth, is knowing the truth. Everyone has an obligation not to allow themselves to be lied to. because a lie deprives you of reality. Okay, that's Joseph Pieper talks about this. When you lie to someone, you kind of deprive them of the reality that they're owed by your speech. And anyone who's deprived of reality by that very fact is not able to make good decisions, prudential decisions for their own good and the good of others. That's the main reason why we have this pandemic of lies, is because the elites who are trying to control things are trying to deprive people of their connection with the real and with God and with their own identity and who they are. And they're trying to shape everyone in their own psychopathic, demonic image so that they consent to being slaves. I think that's the ultimate evil, is when you have people consenting to their own destruction, both spiritual and societal and physical. That's kind of what the agenda is. So the greatest, if you realize that that's the game plan here, then finding out what the truth is as much as possible in every kind of way, from the deeply metaphysical, theological, philosophical to the political and economic and cultural, it takes a lot. The educational system was attacked, early on in America or in the Western democracies, and there's a whole history of that. And so people are kind of already damaged and weakened and deprived of the resources to be able to think critically, and not just thinking critically in terms of like logic and dialectics, but they're also missing the baptism of their imagination, the enrichment that happens through good literature, good stories, just good cultural artifacts. I mean, those are being replaced with technocratic ugliness and soulless entertainment and propaganda replacing good intellectual, fare. So there's a lot of, ultimately, I think that then you're talking about how hard it is. If you want to talk about priorities, well, how do you put yourself in a position so that you're best able to know the truth about the big picture, the small picture, yourself? Well, you have to be in touch with God, because God is intimate. He comes to us and he enlightens us through the Holy Spirit. And that goes for everyone, regardless of your particular religious tradition. Everyone has access to God. Like you mentioned, I'm a Catholic, so I think the access to God, his saving grace, and the true knowledge about who he is and what his plan is, comes through the Catholic Church, which is the mystical body of Jesus Christ, who was the God-man. So I do believe that's why that institution is being so undermined and attacked, and not the least of which by its main leader right now. Well,
wait a minute. Isn't Islam being attacked even more? I mean, 9/11, the supreme satanic ritual of our time, was all about going after Islam, and then of course the Russian Orthodox Church is now being attacked.
Yeah. No, I get that. It's an all-out assault on every tradition and institution and group of people who have the consciousness that God exists and is real and is the only important thing in life. It really is those who grasp eternity, who live their life with that eye on eternity and see everything they're doing in light of that. So yeah, that goes for faithful Muslims, faithful Christians, and the good-willed humanists among us. That's certainly true. So I don't know. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't know if we have to debate that. As a Catholic, I'm gonna say that that's the center. There's no doubt that Islam was attacked in 9/11, but it was attacked for not only geopolitical reasons, but I think ultimately spiritual reasons, certainly.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that the new atheists who arose from the ashes of the controlled demolition of the Trade Center seem to hate Islam the most, because they hate God, and they look at all the religious traditions, and the one that seems to be the most purely focused on God is Islam. and they can somehow get a little bit of humanism, which then they twist into Satanism from Christianity, and they could get a lot of sort of a different kind of humanism out of Judaism. But with Islam being just bowing down and surrendering to God 5 times a day, it's so purely focused on God, it's so intense that it seemed to really drive them up a wall.
Yeah. Well, it may be that Christianity and the Catholicism has already been so undermined and weakened and diluted and distorted that they didn't need to worry too much. That's just such an absolute scandal. And it's certainly the case. There's nothing worse than progressive Christians. I mean, they really are the bane of existence because they are two-faced, double-minded. Their yes is not yes, and their no is not no.
But wait a minute, some of my best friends are progressive Christians. Sandra Hicks, David Ray Griffin, and John Cobb. Griffin and Cobb are genius-level academics. And
well, all right, let's talk about I respect them a lot. I mean, to me, anybody who opposes evil and sees it for what it is not really progressive. I mean, they have progressive leanings in certain areas, maybe academic areas, but I don't know. I have much more in common with someone, to me, like someone who gets 9/11, gets the pandemic, and gets the false flag stuff, and understands the state as an idol. I don't know. They may say they're progressive, but I see them as much more deeply spiritual and rooted in reality. For the progressive, to me, is a kind of spiritual disease. It's a psychological stunting. The people who have this mindset are, they're just they're cowards. They tend to be cowards. They hide behind their little narratives they create. They're ultimately self-serving. They're scapegoaters. They tend to hate whatever's really good, whatever's really good and manly and old-fashioned and traditional. And they just hate it. And they're kind of little totalitarians. I don't see those guys you mentioned like that. So anyway, maybe it's not a good word, progressive. We could figure out a better word. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think that it goes beyond just to what extent they've embraced a certain kind of progressivism in their ideology. I think that there's a level of honesty and integrity that people can have, even if they disagree on some of the details. Like, some people would say, for example, that these issues that you raise, you're saying, in your article, you're kind of taking a strong position that basically the whole COVID thing is a big hoax. And there are other people who would agree with you and would raise you one and say that global warming and the whole climate change issue, human caused carbon driven climate change is a total hoax too. Yeah. And then, but somebody like David Ray Griffin would write a very alarmist book on global warming, saying no, it's true, it is dangerous. We really basically supporting the whole environmentalist case. So I think there are people like David Ray Griffin and John Cobb who they share certain things with the liberal progressive mentality. They don't like nationalism. They think that given the weapons that are around today, we have to transcend nationalism, have some kind of global government. They want it to be a bottom-up global government, not the top-down masters of usury global government that's shaping up right now. But in other words, there's a certain room for disagreement. Likewise, I would sort of disagree a little bit with your maximalist interpretation of the entire scamdemic as being one big hoax. No, I think it's a biological attack, and it's a very dangerous virus.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm agnostic. I mean, I just watched a good talk with Mike Yeadon, the former vice president of Pfizer. And he was talking, and I think he was citing, a new study by Dennis Rancourt from Canada. He was one of the early, whistleblowers about this, and, just making the case that if you look at all the what do they call it? The deaths, the amount of deaths, excess deaths, right? There's a real good, reasonable argument to be made that they didn't really increase. And it's like 100-page article that he wrote, like a very high level academic paper. So I'm agnostic. It seems like they're there could have been a bioweapon, like I know your theory about the attack on China is it Ron Unz has put forth. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely plausibility that it was that. But then, you have to look at all the way that the cases were increased on purpose with the faulty test to make it seem like it was, people were dying everywhere. It was in many ways, I think you could, and Reiner Fulnick makes the case that it was really a case-demic that caused it to be seen as a pandemic, because of the lie of the PCR test. And then, of course, the lies that were put forth to kind of gaslight people, to say that asymptomatic people are going to be main carriers of this and cause a pandemic is definitely untrue in my book. So we can get into the details of that.
We would probably disagree on some of those details in the same way that Denny Rancourt, who's been on the show a few times, he actually doesn't believe that the Twin Towers came down and controlled demolitions. He thinks it's possible or even likely that they just sort of self-destructed in about 10 seconds each, because the amount of gravitational energy available is so great that practically anything can happen. And it's the most ridiculous argument out there, but he makes it. And so, like that, there's one where I would strongly disagree with you. And he's a PhD physicist.
Yeah, I don't understand that. I have to admit, Kevin, sometimes I can't understand how someone can be so astute and in reality on one issue and not on others. It's really incredible. I don't think I'll ever understand that. But I guess what do we all have in common here? I mean, I think you mentioned a kind of integrity and virtue and love of truth. And I mentioned this low-level consciousness, and I try to spell it out and describe it. And then I get to the high-level consciousness. And I think, people can have a high-level consciousness and not be right on every issue. I mean, it's very difficult to be right on some of these complex issues.
Yes.
But I do think, someone who really thinks, who can't see that the injections are part of a kind of a lying agenda to hurt people to some extent. And in other words, there's something untrue here. And the people who are at the top orchestrating and who have the most power are not good people. They are not doing this for our health. Okay, if you can't see that, you have a very low level of consciousness. Mm-hmm. If you can't see that the constant sort of talk about gender and gender reassignment surgery, if you celebrate a 10-year-old, a 10-year-old girl getting her breast removed, and you kind of put that up and celebrate it because she's convinced she's not a woman, you have a very low level consciousness. So I think there's things we have to agree on there, and if people don't see that, then you can go down the list. You could talk about issues of different moral issues. If you can't see that there's something askew in the whole Ukraine issue, if you really just buy I think it's basically, what is it that causes people to buy and to accept with a kind of mindless docility certain narratives? I mean, without any Socratic consciousness at all, without any sense that, I might not be being told here the full truth. It just boggled my mind how many people succumbed to the propaganda on both 9/11 COVID and Ukraine. And I would also include the climate change thing. I'll have to disagree with, although I don't know enough about it. I just have this deep spiritual intuition that it's kind of a hoax. They're using that to gain totalitarian power. And it seems like it's all planned. It's the next step, after the COVID. Well, I guess the pandemic's over. Biden told us it's over. And so it's over. So we have to go to the next one now. And obviously that one has potential to be even more totalitarian, seems to me.
It could be. Well, your article, I think, makes a really interesting connection between these grossly misguided beliefs about these public policy issues and the sort of larger, call it a false religion of secular, materialist progressivism, humanism, liberalism, this kind of mishmash that has sort of bound together into the dominant religion of the elites today. And
wokeism, I guess, is a good word for it.
Yeah. And so they believe in endless progress through technology that makes us more and more free, individually as well as collectively. And so somebody who has accepted that as their sort of false religion is going to be susceptible to these public myths that arise about these current events. Because, for instance, if you believe in endless medical progress and you accept the false narrative that the main reason that horrible contagious diseases were largely controlled and eradicated from the 19th century up until today due to medical interventions, first and foremost vaccines. If you accept that belief, then as soon as you hear that there's some dangerous COVID virus going around, you pray for a vaccine and you bow down before the holy vaccine because your sacred narrative is telling you that progress is going to give us power and freedom and we can beat the disease that way. And likewise, I think with some of these other issues as well.
Well, okay, that's good because I think that helps us to understand. So if that's really a sacred kind of absolute dogma, instead of just an opinion like that you just happen to hold, if you treat it as if it's an irrefutable, indisputable truth, what you just described, then you kind of see it as untouchable. It would be wrong. It would be like a sin to doubt it.
Well, yeah, the anti-vaxxers are heretics.
Okay. Right, they're heretics. And so that means that no possible evidence to the contrary could ever sway you from that. Now, to me, the only truths that should have such a place in your mind and heart are indisputable truths about morality, about the natural law, and about God. And I would say about Catholicism, because I believe that the truths that come through the church are absolutely true due to the authority of those who have communicated them, and also that they can coincide with reason, that they're given plausibility by certain marks, miracles, and things like that. So you would say that about the Quran, but other things can be believed strongly and can be sort of given a certain amount of credence, but you're open to correction because they're not the kind of truths that can't be refuted. But these people have these idols, okay, and they are idols. And the idols are self-serving. All idols are. The reason why God hates idols is because when you worship an idol, you're always worshiping some aspect of your will and yourself. You're worshiping something that contributes to pride and device, as opposed to humility and love of God. So idols always contribute to a kind of lower spiritual health and goodness, because the things you're worshiping flatter you. They put you at the center. You get to be part of the in group, the smart ones, whatever it is, the ones who accept science, the ones who are enlightened. They all have this. That's kind of what I mean by progressivism. It's those beliefs that when you believe them and hold to them and then associate yourself with other people who you think hold them, it's always a self-serving thing. It's not about their truth. If it is about the actual truth, and you hold the truth to be the most important thing, and you're willing to suffer for it, and even be part of the scapegoated group, then you're already 99% of the way there in your level of consciousness. And then it just takes some time to figure out what those truths are, which ones you're deceived about. You're coming out of the cave. But I do think it's this kind of tendency to kind of idolatry, which is really the wickedness we're seeing.
I agree.
Yeah,
that's the one unforgivable sin in Islam is shirk or idolatry, and I think your reasoning fits perfectly. As essentially everything you said at the beginning, summarizing your Catholic approach to these issues was just echoing with Quranic references as you were saying them. There's so much in common. It really makes me wonder about why Christians and Muslims have been at each other's throats at various times in history, especially sort of post 9/11. Since I think we see things more closely than just about any other sort of two major religious groups on earth. And of course, that leads to the Ukraine issue. There's a war on Russia going on. To what extent is this war on Russia and these lies being told, supporting the war propaganda, driven by the fact that the empire, the Zio-American, Western, neoliberal, progressivist empire, thinks that Russia is this old-fashioned Christian religious. It's returning to these sort of quote-unquote Enlightenment forms, right? It's blaspheming against these sacred aspects of the Western sacred narrative of progress and liberalism and materialism, and so it seems like it's almost sort of a heretic hunt or a witch hunt against Putin, who's being held up as the new Hitler, precisely because Russia is not 100% on board with this narrative.
Well, that does seem right to me. I don't know. I have no idea if Putin is sincere and honest. Like his latest speech he gave is very much against the NWO, right?
Great speech.
So if that's really what he believes, then he's certainly an enemy to them. And I mean, could you imagine Biden ever saying like that? Trump wouldn't even speak that way.
No, only the supreme leader of Iran, of all the heads of state, I think, would speak that way.
That's right, and it's certainly not so-called Pope Francis would speak the opposite way. He would condemn Putin's speech. I mean, that's how bad the church right now is in its human element. It's been corrupted and infiltrated, no doubt. But a lot of bishops would, like Bishop Vigano. I mean, if you've read some Bishop Vigano's speeches, that they support what Putin's saying, and Vigano was right on the Ukraine from the beginning, and he was also the most outspoken and accurate, heroic exposer of the pandemic. So, and he's not the only bishop and priest. So yeah, I agree with you. If there's going to be ecumenism, it should be an ecumenical jihad against this satanic force. And there's so much more in common that we have, as witness this conversation right now, and the fact that your main partner in False Flag Weekly News is E. Michael Jones. What a great duo that is.
Yeah, he's going to be on tomorrow, by the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're picking the right people, I think, and it shows you that. And Jones goes on a lot of different shows and with different people with different opinions, and he tries to tell the truth, and he's trying to get them united against this great evil, which is certainly the Antichrist. I mean, what we're dealing with here is the preparation, the infrastructure of the Antichrist. There's no doubt about it. I think we're close to this. We're in the opening of the 7 seals in the book of Revelation, which talk about economic, political, destruction and war and just this awful, like you mentioned, pre-apocalyptic situation, where the Antichrist will be the savior. And, it's certainly being prepared. And the people preparing it, I think, are in many ways demonically possessed or oppressed, or they're just wicked, or they're just psychopathic. And they are the enemy. And we have so many people who are compromised and who are complicit, who are either indifferent or are somehow cooperating with it, whether by being brainwashed or by their own vices and their own need to fit in and be with the cool group, I mean, this brings us, we could talk about Rene Girard in this aspect. If you're not focused on God and as the divine scapegoat, and you're not looking at your own sins and your own cause of evil, you're going to scapegoat others. And all of these different propaganda campaigns, from 9/11 to the pandemic, to Ukraine, and then to the climate change one that's coming, it's all a gigantic sort of myth-making, scapegoating campaign, starting with ritual murder, and then moving on to having a whole group of people who are the cause of the evil, the unrest. And then if you get on board, you could be part of the righteous, and you could feel saved. by that identity, that group identity. And that is so deep in our psyche because we're supposed to be saved by identifying ourselves with a divine scapegoat and his community, which is a community that suffers, that is martyred, and that returns love for evil and loves enemies and never looks at others as the cause of the ultimate evil, but always looks first to ourselves. Because these scapegoating religions are the mirror opposite of these. They're counterfeits of that. And that's powerful, very powerful.
It is. And along those lines, it's interesting that the end times, as envisioned by Muslims and Christians, is very similar. That is, in Islam, the Akhir al-Zaman or end time scenarios involve the Dajjal, who is the Antichrist. He's not the anti-Muhammad, peace upon him. He's the Antichrist. That's kind of interesting, right? I think Christians may not quite get that and its implications. And also that's because Muslims, like Christians, accept that Jesus Christ is the one true Messiah who will return in the end times to set things right. And so that would sort of indicate that there is something about the Messiah that is unique and special to Muslims as well as the Christians. We don't interpret it exactly the same way using the same language, but there's something similar there. And maybe the Girardian approach is a way to figure out what that is, because I think that Islam, like Christianity, is very amenable to a Girardian analysis. We look at the biggest feast day, right? The big one holiday, the Eid, is all about the end of human sacrifice with the story of Abraham and his son.
Right.
And the ethic of Islam is very much an ethic of peace, social peace, avoiding any kind of ostentation that creates the kind of envy that leads to the war of all against all that Girard said is the cause of scapegoating. So it's a society that's built on ending scapegoating rather than the society that's built on scapegoating. And then the return of Jesus is perhaps, in the Girardian sense, is the full revelation of the truth about the human tendency to scapegoat, to project one's own sins on others. And so the return of Jesus would be when we sort of finally get over that. And, of course, Muslims and Christians should be yearning for that. And, of course, at the same time, people who are nominally Muslims and or Christian cannot not get this. I don't mean get it intellectually by reading Girard, but I mean just feeling it in the heart. And there are those who are nominal Christians and Muslims who are still running around scapegoating people. You see it all the time. And so I think what's happening is operating at a level it's deeper than dogma. And,
yes. Yeah. No, that's good. I think that's maybe another way of answering our question on what's in common here. It's not necessarily different takes on climate change or the two towers or whether or not there was a bioweapon aimed at China and Iran. It's not those issues really, right? Because the people who hold those different views, there's a commonality there that we sense. Is it really perhaps whether you're scapegoating others? I mean, whether you're repentant of that? We all fall into it, but there are people who live their lives doing this. They do it personally. They do it in their jobs. They do it in their families. They do it on social media. They do it. I mean, it's just they live a life of constantly projecting their sins onto those who don't deserve it, and thereby attaining this kind of illusion of salvation and righteousness. I mean, I think Jesus came to save us from that. And anyone who's not doing that, in my opinion, if you're not scapegoating, you are full of Christ's grace, even if you don't recognize it. You could attribute that grace to Allah or to something else, but I'm just saying, to me, that's the grace of God coming through Jesus Christ's sacrifice and the merits and grace he won for us through that. The Holy Spirit then being poured out to people who are of goodwill and who are living lives of repentance. And it seems to me that the main way you want to know if you're repenting is not how many rosaries you say or how many times a day you pray, but it's whether you're really not giving in to the temptation to scapegoat, or at least you're aware of your tendency to this and you hate it in yourself. And you cry out to God to stop it. I mean, that to me is very, very deep. If you are able to see that, And it doesn't matter, what particular religious tradition you're ascribing to. That shows that you love truth, that you're humble, that you love God more than yourself, and God will bring you to the fullness of truth at some point. But you have to be doing that. And don't you think that every one of these totalitarian propaganda campaigns, with all that goes with that, with all the psyops, with all the social engineering, isn't it really just a kind of temptation to treat the scapegoating that you're already doing as okay, justifying it, and then even almost commanding it as a sign of being a good person and a citizen?
Yeah, it seems that way to me. It's interesting that Trump and Trump's followers got scapegoated so intensely by the right-thinking people of the mainstream and the left. And it's a little confusing to me because it's not one of these cases where they're scapegoating someone who is largely admirable. To my mind,
right.
The Catholic Church, Islam, and even to some extent Putin are they have an admirable aspect which seems to have drawn the scapegoating. I mean, even a bad guy like Saddam Hussein was scapegoated not because of anything bad he did, but because of the good that he did, which was using his oil money to help his people and to fight Zionism. So, it seems like it's complex, this question of scapegoating, and Trump was not, to me, particularly admirable, except perhaps in his blurt outs of truth. He also blurted out untruth, perhaps more than others too. I mean, it's hard to say that Trump is a person of truth while his persecutors are people of the lie. I mean, they're all people of the lie. It seems
my take on that is, no, Trump was a promoter of the vaccine. He's just a narcissist. He's not a virtuous guy. But don't you think that what Trump represented in that first election when he was elected was a kind of populist revolt against the elite establishment?
Absolutely.
Okay, insofar as he was an icon for that, even though he didn't deserve it, I think the attack on Trump was really an attack on those types of people. I met these people. Yeah, and the deplorables are good people, more or less. Okay, I know who they are. I've met them. I consider myself one, not a Trump supporter, but one of those supporters of those values. Traditional family, you love America because you think it's good in terms of, the idea of God and the idea of just, local communities and having all those things that are sort of represented in kind of the movies of like, what's his name? The director. Shoot, we're thinking about. Mr. Smith.
Frank Capra?
Yeah. Frank Capra. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and It's a Wonderful Life, and it's that culture that was attacked mercilessly in the 60s. And so insofar as it does represent a kind of maybe naive but a basic wholesomeness, that's why they hated it. And so, it wasn't Trump.
So it's like Saddam Hussein. He's a bad guy in a lot of ways, but they hate him because of the good things associated with him.
Yeah, I think that's probably true about Putin. Maybe Putin. I don't know why I keep saying Putin. Putin.
But see, I think Putin actually does have some admirable characteristics. I mean, he speaks a lot of truth. He's clear-sighted. He's a smart guy. He can sit there without notes and speak very clearly and accurately. And basically, everything he's doing doesn't strike me as particularly unreasonable. He's in a tough situation, and what else is he supposed to do? Yeah,
I have no reason not to think that's true. I mean, there's all I don't know. You had that other guest who thought I don't know. I didn't like that guest you had on Trad Cat Night. I don't really like that guy too much, what he was saying. He seemed to just be talking about all these people as the same, exactly the same. They're all just pawns. They're all just part of the New World Order, every one of them, right? They're all the same.
That's too easy. That saves you from having to do the work of
I agree.
discerning.
I agree. It's just kind of it's not reasonable or responsible to do that. Like, yeah, of course, insofar as you're part of the establishment in any way, you're going to be in some way compromised. But look, there are good people. I guess. What do you think of the new Italian president?
Well, yeah, she looks to me like one of these, symbols of the deplorables, sort of like Trump was. And she probably has some downsides, but overall, I kind of have to admit I like seeing things shook up, and especially at this moment when voting people like that into office is a bit of a slap in the face of
Yes.
the establishment that's pushing this dangerous war that could explode into a nuclear Armageddon at any moment. So sort of a little bit of, it's to some extent a vote against the horrible lies that are pushing us towards Armageddon. It's a vote against the woke extremist insanity. And so it's kind of heartening.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that there is a pushback now and a resistance that's growing, and as that grows, the powers that be will be more desperate and more violent. As you mentioned in your what you wrote about in your preface, the lies are just becoming more and more thick, as you say. I mean, just getting more and more and more insane. And there are some who are just fully on board. They're never going to come out of it, I think. But as those lies and the violence that comes with them and the contradiction between what they say, what they do, and as people themselves are suffering because of these, personal suffering, they can't be protected anymore from that. And I think that's going to happen with the vaccine deaths. I think they're going to increase. The injuries and deaths are just going to become so overwhelming, in my opinion, that it's going to wake a lot of people up. At that point, when you have enough people awake and who recognize that they've been tortured and murdered and deceived, and then those who are doing this recognize this, I don't know if we've seen that situation yet in history, really, with a global kind of cabal with the utmost evil intentions and plans, and having enough people awake to it. What could that mean? I mean, what's the next chapter there, do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting possibility. If the damage from the vaccines becomes so extreme that they can't hide it anymore, and things start to spin out of control, because there is this strong sort of freedom movement that arose during the COVID period, that freedom movement then could get energized by that kind of revelation. And I think it's a possibility. I'm not sure what level of vaccine damage would be necessary before that would happen. We did have tremendous vaccine damage from these early polio vaccines that were contaminated with cancer-causing monkey viruses. Some estimates are that may have caused as much as an actual majority of a great many of the leading cancers. For through the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Well, all the autism too that we see now.
Yes, vaccines and autism, and but unfortunately they have succeeded in largely covering that up. And obviously, it's like 1 in 50 kids is now on the autism spectrum. At what level does it have to reach before they actually do a study of this? I just had that Zoe O'Toole, the editor of Turtles All the Way Down, on the show last week. And her book, Turtles All the Way Down, is highly recommended for people who would like to see sort of the basic scientific question about the vaccines that hasn't been answered. And, they won't do the studies that would answer the questions because, whether they know how bad it's going to be or whether they can just sense that it's going to be bad enough that it's going to inflame anti-vax sentiment. We don't really know. I mean, there could be other causes of autism. There could be other things that are contributing to some of these things. What precisely, how much it's the vaccines, we don't know. But they won't. They intentionally refuse to do the studies that would clarify that. And so, there are a lot of really angry people, mostly the parents of autistic kids and other kids with syndromes, chronic diseases that may have been caused by vaccines.
Well, yeah. My question is, I mean, a lot of people are just gaslit, and they are in Stockholm syndrome. So they're defending their enemies, and they're siding with their enemies, basically. Perhaps because the alternative is such an amount of uncontrollable rage at what's been done to them, right? So they have a defense mechanism, right? I think that's what causes that, to some extent. Well, what if you have people snapping out of their Stockholm syndrome and they recognize the gaslighting for what it is? You're going to have a lot of people who don't have a real understanding of how to love your enemies, okay? Because you have to first of all find out who your enemy is, and then you have to love your enemy. That doesn't mean you let them walk over you. It means you secure justice, just punishment. You make sure that these enemies are never able to be in power. but you're not. Revenge is what is the possibility, and that's happened before in history when the great masses of people have woken up to the people manipulating them, and so that's a danger. That's a danger too.
It is. Yeah, it would be pretty easy to form an angry scapegoating mob and go after some of these people. Like Tony Fauci seems to be sort of they're throwing him to the wolves now. It's like it's becoming sort of okay now to turn against him.
Yeah. So that's a possible. I don't know which one would be worse. I mean, I think the waking up has to happen. Honestly, it's hard for me to imagine what that would look like. And so at this point, I guess I'm just trying to, live my life the way I need to, but also write and speak about the issues that relate what's happening to the spiritual, because I think that is the most important. I think there are more and more people awake to that fact, like Naomi Wolf. She's a good example of a progressive, you might say, who I would have thought was kind of my enemy in her support of abortion and, sexual license and other kind of liberal things, right? Feminism. Those aren't things I really like too much and think are evil. But as for whatever reason, she woke up to the evil of this, especially the vaccine mandates and the passports. And she's the first one who said, if this happens, we will lose Western civilization, right? If these vaccine passports become normalized. But then she became much more interested in the question of evil because she sensed it. There was no other explanation for the agenda she was seeing going on, but a kind of supernatural one. And I think she came closer to God with that. And I mean, I have much more in common with her than many Christians and Catholics who are just poo-pooing the evil of this. I can't tell you how many times I hear them say things like, well, yes, there was some mismanagement, and the vaccines are very effective, and there are side effects, and they should know about those. But one is in good conscience to get those. The Pope said so, and it's an act of love. But do your research, and I mean. And nobody. Come on, Thaddeus. Nobody had this plan to hurt people. No, that doesn't happen. The state is. This is science we're talking about. This is medicine. That to me, that mindset is the most dangerous and despicable, in my opinion. You have to look at the evil here. You cannot. That's just a cowardly, self-serving, unreal attitude to have.
Yeah. Now, Naomi Wolf, I think, has a kind of an instinctive or intuitive sense of the evil coming out of these things. I think she kind of got 9/11. She may not have really spoken clearly about it. She actually defended me, or at least gave me a favorable coverage in her book, The Letters to a Young Patriot, from the 2006 period.
Oh, wow.
So you could kind of sense that she's a closet truther. Because I think she does have that kind of uncanny ability to sense the deeper lay of the land on issues like 9/11 and COVID. So yeah, I think you're right. I think she's kind of on our team, even though she's a feminist, presumably still pro-abortion, very civil libertarian, kind of a strong advocate of the freedom ideology in its strong form, and yet she's not completely unawake by any means.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways you could describe what's been happening since 9/11 is God allowing for a kind of supernatural revelation of evil. So with Christ, he revealed to us perfect goodness, and throughout history, he showed the good fruits of this. You mentioned the monasteries and all the saints and the sacraments, and but now it's time to show what true evil looks like, and maybe that might have the same response, the same reaction. When you recognize what evil is, when it's revealed to you, there's no other explanation for that than God. And it also helps you to understand what God is like, because he's the exact opposite. And I think a lot of people woke up to this through this, and that maybe is the silver lining on all this. I just wish we could have more revelation of goodness. I wish that would come soon, because the revelation just keeps coming and coming and coming, and the evil is darker and more demonic. Like I mentioned, I mean, there's just nothing more demonic than this kind of masking a child for 8 hours and doing it, saying you're doing it for like their good. But all the while, it's a kind of torture of these children. It's just torture. And it's also self-serving, because they might infect us. Jesus said it would be better if a millstone was hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea, that you scandalize or, damage or do anything to hurt one of these. And he had the children around him.
Yeah. Dostoevsky picked up on that, and he expanded on that thought.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Like if you could save the entire world and fix all the problems and make life a paradise on earth, but to do it, you had to sort of torture and kill one child
right.
to do it. And he says, no way.
Well, yeah, Alyosha says, no, I wouldn't do it. That was his famous conversation with Ivan and the Brothers Karamazov. Yeah, everybody should go read the Brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment. Good spiritual reading for right now.
Yep. Yeah, I would say Brothers Karamazov is the great Christian novel, which makes it the great Western novel, which really makes it the great novel, period, because, let's face it, that's probably the tradition. That's the culture that took the novel to its highest point. So,
yes.
Score one for the Christians. Well, hey, thank you so much, Thaddeus Kozinski. It's always great having you on, and I think you're really onto something with this latest essay, which people can find by going to truthjihad.com, click on the radio link, find today's show's listing, and follow the links. All right, we're hearing the bumper music, so good night, Thaddeus. God bless. Keep up the great work.
Good night, Kevin. God bless you.
Bye-bye. Thaddeus Kozinski there. Kevin Barrett here, truthjihad.com. Back next week, same time, same channel. Until then, have a great week.